Joining us now is senior researcher at the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study, Dr. Sean Muller. And Sean joins us now via telephone line. Dr. Sean, thank you so much for joining us this evening here on SABC News. Perhaps let's start off here. When it comes to an economic point of view, what are your expectations on the State of the Nation address that will be delivered tomorrow?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that one should probably not expect too much from the State of the Nation address. In theory, the president is supposed to lay out the government's plan essentially for the year. And based on that plan, we then have the budget tabled in Parliament, which is supposed to essentially reflect that plan in the government's expenditure, revenue raising and debt raising plans. In reality, SONA is more of a political statement. And of course, it has to cover the full breadth of what South Africans are expecting and what is going on in the country. So I think what we're most likely to see is, what one might call more rhetoric about state-owned enterprises like Eskom and Transnet, trying to improve the situation with load shedding, trying to improve the situation with logistics, both of which, of course, are very important, but we've heard many statements about those over the last 5 years without noticeable improvements. And then potentially some preparation of South Africans for quite a difficult budget, which may well be cutting key expenditure areas and possibly increasing taxes.
And of course, Sean, you're saying there that we can expect much when it comes to the state of the economy and the plans for government. But you're saying that, of course, we're not expecting much from the State of the Nation address, because we know that this would be the last one for this administration just before we head to the 2024 elections. But at the same time, because of the problems we are faced with South Africa, the issue of job creation is still another problem that this country needs to deal with. Do you think he will emphasize on some of the programs that this government has tried to steer ahead when it comes to dealing with the high unemployment rate in South Africa?
I think there's no doubt that that will be the case. I think it's also important to note that on the one hand, I tend to share the view that President Ramaphosa and his administration have not delivered on a number of their promises, key promises, and there are various reasons for that. At the same time, when looking at some of the metrics, it's important to bear in mind we did have a once-in-a-century pandemic, which had very negative effects on the economy, both directly and indirectly through some of the policies that were adopted to try and address it. And in that context, various measures were introduced. The social relief of distress grant is a particularly important one, and it will be interesting to see an indication from the president as to the plan with social grants for the coming year. But certainly there have also been employment creation programs, some of which have been reasonably successful, and others like the employment tax incentive, which the president has extended under his administration, which have been almost entirely ineffective, but have cost tens of billions of rands. So it's quite a mixed record. But of course, in the SONA, the president will attempt to present the most positive version.
And of course, being an election year, once again, Dr. Sean, at the same time, we would know that when it comes to this State of the Nation address, how does he instill confidence in South Africans, especially during a time where the economy is struggling, high inflation, interest rates, and just issues where, a number of challenges South Africans are faced with a number of challenges, particularly when it comes to the state of the economy. How does he try and foster confidence in South Africans, during the State of the Nation?
Yes, well, I think that's quite difficult, especially when earlier efforts in that regard have not been have not manifested in improvements. So, understandably, South Africans are going to be cynical. I think what we will see is a repeat of earlier rhetoric, things about structural reforms and the separation of Eskom and these sorts of things. Interventions which, in fact, I also think have not worked because they've prioritized the wrong issues. They've prioritized, for example, changing the structure of certain state-owned enterprises and areas of the economy, which might be something worth doing in general, but is perhaps not a good thing to be doing in a crisis situation where perhaps one should be prioritizing issues like load shedding itself, logistical constraints themselves, rather than trying to break up Transnet and break up Eskom. So I think the president's got a very difficult task ahead of him. No doubt he'll be leveraging some of the things that are not directly related to political activity, like sports victories and so forth. But I think when it comes to fundamentals, the budget that's going to be tabled later this month is going to be more important. I think that budget is going to be the proposals in that budget are going to be quite unpleasant for South Africans. And that in itself is also quite strange, because one of the things we worry about in public finance and public economics is that political parties will behave irresponsibly before elections. They'll spend too freely and irresponsibly. In fact, from the ANC, what we see is almost the opposite. They seem quite keen to impose austerity immediately before the elections, which is highly unusual. And I think if we wanted to consider the reasons for that, we would probably have to go more into the political domain than into the economic domain.
And are you hoping to hear anything about the basic income grant, especially with some calling for it to be at least 1,000 rand a month?
Well, I think that's a crucial issue, and the president certainly should address it, but whether he will or not is another matter. Certainly the budget will give us a much better idea of what's going on. But that's a great example of what I was just talking about, because in fact, in last year's budget, the National Treasury proposed to cut that grant shortly before this year's elections. And it was only after opposition by a number of groupings and analysts, including myself, that the Treasury was forced to backpedal and has indicated that they would continue it for last year and they'll probably continue it for this year. I very much doubt that the government is going to table any large increase given the fiscal situation. So I think the real question is, will existing social grants be sustained? Will they be given to those who are eligible for them? And how is that going to be incorporated into government's plans to stabilize or reduce national debt?
And SOEs is still a major problem in South Africa. Eskom, on the other hand, we remember last year we had a date of when load shedding will be ending, but today we are still faced with load shedding. Do you think that he'll want to at least give us a date again, or do you think that he will be staying away from saying when exactly load shedding will be ending in this country?
Well, I certainly hope he'll be staying away from that. I mean, I think all those previous statements, whether by the president or various ministers, were extremely ill-advised. You're dealing with a system which clearly the operator doesn't have full control over. That's why you have load shedding. There have been these unexpected failures of plants and so forth. So how one could expect to promise with certainty that load shedding would end from a particular point in time, I don't know. And that's unsurprisingly why those promises have never been fulfilled. So hopefully the president won't be making more promises. I think what the president will be emphasizing is what they refer to as progress with the structural reform of Eskom. But unfortunately, I think that's part of the reason why load shedding has continued for as long as it has and has actually worsened. Because instead of focusing on addressing the direct problems at Eskom, which is load shedding and the fiscal and financial situation, what they've done is they've focused on breaking up Eskom with the hope that over the longer term, that's the right thing to do. But at least in the short and medium term, it means that their attention has been diverted from the core problem, or at least that's my view.
Sean, thank you so much for your time tonight here in SABC News. That is Dr. Sean Muller. He is a senior researcher at the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study.